This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Sometimes that Cody clip is too fitting. It's funny too because that specific part of that clip from the promo, not only did it wind up being Cody's very last promo in AEW before he left last year, but it was also the only thing that I actually remembered about that entire promo. It was the very first line. And it was all about the delivery of it. So condescending, yet so perfect. He said, "I see the writing on the wall. My contract is expiring and I'm fixing to GTFO. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya." Good call, Cody. Jump off that sinking ship while you still can. And while Cody is not directly factored into what we're going to be talking about on today's show, that does not mean that he will not come up in conversation, especially when we talk about the Elimination Chamber show. I've had a lot of thoughts brewing about that thing from Saturday night, and a lot of it might surprise you by the end. You probably know me as somebody that loves to come on here and whine, complain, and gripe about how horrible modern professional wrestling is in a lot of cases. The one thing you have not heard me say a bad word about is anything involving the Bloodline story on SmackDown. WWE's hit a lot of foul balls in terms of story delivery in the last 15 or so years, but this Bloodline thing has been a walk-off from the beginning. I think that's baseball terminology, right? I don't know. I do not watch baseball, but I think a walk-off is when a guy at bat hits a home run right out of the gate with nobody on base or anything. Am I right about that? Somebody can tell me. It's not a grand slam, because I think that's different. And now that I've turned away every single viewer watching this podcast, thanks to my horrendous sports references, welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. I don't know sports. I don't know jack squat about anything pertaining to sports, by and large. But I dang sure know a thing or two about pro wrestling. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Got a lot to talk about. Some bad, some good. It's going to cover a wide range of WWF and WWE related content. As per our Monday format, we're going to be discussing Retro Raw from 1994, this most recent episode of SmackDown in very short detail. And then for our main event of the show, the main course, if you will, we're going to be covering the Elimination Chamber Premium Live special on The Cock. Took place this past Saturday, February 18th at the Bell Center in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And boy, what a crowd. If anything, that'll be the main takeaway from that entire event. Regardless of match finishes or booking or anything that took place throughout that entire show, that Montreal crowd really put into perspective that there are still ways of bringing back tradition when it comes to professional wrestling. There are still ways of making you believe, even if you already know the business is a work, and even if you know things are predetermined, doesn't mean you still can't suspend your disbelief at the right moments. That main event was something else. And there's a lot to say about it, but before we do so, we got a couple other warm-up prelim discussions to get to, beginning with this episode of Retro Raw from February 21st, 1994. And on this non-preempted episode of Monday Night Raw, we're picking back up with the road to WrestleMania 10. Things are kind of naturally falling into place for that card, and we're still about a month and a half out from the actual event. I noted directly from the beginning here, thank God, no Bastion Booger. Bless. I still have PTSD from that show 2 weeks ago where Bastion Booger was doing color. Haven't been able to sleep since. With that said, we were back in Poughkeepsie, New York for this episode at the Hudson Civic Center. Good old nostalgia trip for all those older episodes of Raw from the previous year. And quite honestly, I would not have been all that surprised if they went back to the Civic Center just so Vince had an excuse to say the word Poughkeepsie. Because it is Vince we're talking about, pal. He loves his weird sayings. And kicking things off for this episode with audio malfunctions, where somebody in the production truck jumped the shark and queued up the wrong theme music from the beginning. We started with them playing the Mounties theme music, and then it very quickly turned over to Savage's theme. Part of me was wondering if that was a shoot, where someone in the back said, God, that theme music is beyond wretched. Can someone cue up the Macho Man music for the love of Christ? But the good news, Savage was back to doing color duty with Vince, wherein he informed us of some big happenings for this episode. Seeing as how it was also President's Day, Macho Man wanted to take the opportunity to recognize the president of the Macho Man fan club. None other than himself. And Vince sold this with an expression on camera that I could merely describe as dumbfounded. As was I. Now, as it turns out, I was ribbing about the Mountie thing. The Quebecers were actually set for ring competition to open things up for the card. For the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championships, it is Jacques and Pierre defending against the team of Razor Ramon and the 1-2-3 Kid. What I believe was initially slated to be Razor and Marty Jannetty. But, you know, false advertising. Wouldn't be the first time we'd see that in the WWF in subsequent years. So they got off to a relatively hot start with the heels trying to jumpstart the challengers. But that didn't last long before Razor and Kid started milking a comeback and running wild. I particularly like the visual of Razor giving his own partner the fall-away sack of shit slam into Jacques, who just kind of stood there wondering how he was supposed to take the bump for it. So when Razor threw him back, Jacques kind of sort of put his hands out to catch Waltman and didn't really work out well, so then he just rolled out of the ring. So, as per usual with a lot of these WWF matches, especially the higher profile advertised matches, they usually like to implement a lot of angles into the mix. So prior to the first commercial, Razor and Waltman were mostly in control. There was a brief heat spot where Johnny Polo tripped up Razor in the ropes, and that essentially spelled bad news for Polo, because about a minute later, Razor recovers and starts chasing Polo around ringside, and they eventually get to the spot where, as Polo tries to round himself around the ring post, the 1-2-3 Kid cuts him off at the pass, which then allows for Razor to give Polo the Razor's Edge onto the outside ring mat, where Polo takes a great overselling bump for it, and, as I wrote down here, I believe was pronounced dead on the spot. So, they go to their first break, and you get all the officials filing out to cart off Polo's dead carcass. It appeared on camera that he was wearing brown loafers with no socks, which was pure comedy in and of itself. especially in that ridiculous getup. And with Polo out of the picture, that basically left the Quebecers to fend for themselves, at the fair 2-on-2 playing field. Naturally, Razor and Waltman took about 90% of the offense. The Quebecers are bumping and selling for pretty much the entire time. And at some point, while Razor and Waltman are in control, who should randomly appear in the aisleway approximately 15 feet away from the ring but Diesel? And this somehow led to the babyfaces being stupid enough to take their eye off of the Quebecers so that the heels could then cut them off and take control. Again, keep in mind, at the point Diesel appeared on camera, he was not even halfway down the aisleway. Just standing there, clenching his fist, looking menacing. Wasn't really doing anything. Yep. This somehow distracted Razor and the 1-2-3 Kid because, well, stupid baby faces and all. So coming back, they actually had a really cool visual where the camera was filming Diesel up close, but because he had shades on, we could also see the reflection off his glasses to what was going on in the ring. That actually looked pretty cool on camera. Meanwhile, back in the ring, the heels are working over the 1-2-3 Kid, and right before Razor gets the hot tag, the Quebecers try a spot where Jacques attempts to give Pierre a back body drop onto Waltman. This looked both visually comical and absurd. And while Razor is making his comeback on the heels, I believe I heard Savage infer that Jacques Rougeau looked, and I quote, disorientated. I believe that was taken from the playbook of Dusty's made-up terminology. And while Razor is kicking ass and throwing the heels around, he goes to set up Pierre for the Razor's Edge, and while Diesel begins ominously and slowly approaching the ringside area behind Waltman, Razor then goes in for the cover on Pierre, and from literally out of nowhere, and I am not exaggerating when I say that, literally out of the fucking void, here comes Shawn Michaels scurrying into the ring like a cat to attack Razor for the blatant DQ. Here's exactly what I actually wrote down in my notes. If that wasn't the most impressive last-minute save to break up a pinfall attempt I have ever seen, I would have easily called BS on the lame DQ finish. But the timing of Shawn to run down the aisleway, slide into the ring, and break up this pinfall when the ref was already at the count of 2 before Shawn even got halfway down the aisleway, holy shit. It was quite the photo finish right there. And as we all know, Michaels and Razor have already been promoted for WrestleMania with their legendary IC title ladder match that I am very much looking forward to reviewing again. So, this is just a heat mechanism for Shawn to get under Razor's skin. Lame DQ finish aside, the match was all right for what it was. Really nothing much further to add to the equation. Good stuff. And after this, they advertised Macho Man versus Yokozuna for the WWF Championship next week. And as random as it was for them to announce this completely out of the blue title match with no prior build-up, boy, you wonder to yourself, what if they swapped Luger as one of the co-Rumble winners in the 1994 Rumble? And instead of pairing Savage to work a program with Crush, they could have factored him into the title equation. I don't know. Could have been an interesting case. Could you imagine how awesome that title match would have been? Or you're just factoring in the fact that we might have gotten Savage versus Brett? I don't know. Makes you wonder. Would have surely been better than Luger. That's for damn sure. I mean, no offense, I love Lex and all, but just being blunt. I did like when Jim Cornette came out next to introduce Dr. Tom Pritchard for his match. First, he addressed Macho Man's title match with Yoko next week and promised that Yokozuna was going to snap him like a Slim Jim. That was a bombshell line right there. But do not let your eyes deceive you with the next match. This was not a rib. The next match was the Doctor of Desire Tom Pritchard versus Bret the Hitman Hart. And what a match it was. Some good old-fashioned pro wrestling is what this was. A scientific clinic, if you will. I mean, I could honestly sit here and break down the logistics of what they did, but do I really need to? I will note, I believe it was during this match where Vince casually mentioned in passing that Nikolai Volkov was in attendance for the show. And it's funny because I noticed this during the tag title match early on, and I'm sitting there watching like, isn't that Nikolai Volkov? Vince never mentioned it one time. And then here, about 3 minutes into the match, Vince is like, and if you'll notice in attendance for the evening, Nikolai Volkov is sitting in the front row. Just casually dropping it like he's a random local celebrity and not a professional wrestling legend of any kind. Speaking of celebrities, when they came back from commercial for this match, they got Donnie Wahlberg on the line to do some album plugs. I don't ever remember this being a thing, but I guess he was one of the featured acts for WrestleMania 10. So they brought him on to plug the show. They also tried to use him as a ploy to relate his brotherly rivalry with the Owen-Brett storyline. Yeah, that went pretty much over as you would expect it to. And all the while, with the side distractions going on here, it is important to note that Bret and Dr. Tom are still having a match in the ring. And right before they cut to commercial again, probably in one of the more scary spots I've seen on a wrestling show in a while, they do a spot where Tom has Bret tied up in the ropes. And while Hebner is trying to hold him back, they're setting up for the distraction spot so Corny can sneak in the back door and maybe give Bret a racket shot to the head. And with Macho Man sitting nearby, he sees this coming, obviously. So he proceeds to get up from the desk to stop Cornette in his tracks. Only, as he goes to grab the racket from Cornette, I don't know what happened here entirely. I think Corny may have lost his balance and tripped while getting into the tug-of-war match with Savage. So he ends up falling on his ass and coming precariously close to cracking the back of his skull on the edge of the ring steps. He did wind up slamming into them, but I think he wound up hitting his upper back against the side of the steps. Either way, it looked extraordinarily bad. And like you could even see Dr. Tom go over and ask him if he was all right. You know, thank God he was fine, but jeez, that was pretty sketchy there for a second. And as Savage calmly goes back to the commentary desk, now holding Corny's tennis racket, the only comment he had on the matter was, "Tennis anyone? Oh yeah." You know, looking back at this, part of me actually wonders if Jim may have any memories of this angle. This could have ended in absolute tragedy if he would have come like 2 inches closer to the ring steps. Good Lord. And meanwhile, they come back from break. Cornette's back on his feet. Totally fine. Not a scratch on him. And then in one of the more obscure finishes I've seen, they do the spot at the end where Bret gets dumped out to the floor, and Cornette runs a distraction so Owen could then come in from the back. And while Dr. Tom is holding back Hebner in the corner, Owen goes down to mock Bret at ringside. He then throws him back into the ring. And at that point you figure, okay, you know, maybe they go a few more minutes. Bret makes the comeback, thwarts all the interference, and comes out victorious. Well, they kind of follow that model. Except instead of them going another 2 or 3 minutes, instead, Brett immediately gets thrown back into the ring. He makes his comeback within the span of about 15 seconds, and then he submits Dr. Tom with the sharpshooter. And Owen Hart, totally oblivious to all this in the aisleway, continues to admonish the fans and put over how Brett's always needed Owen's help no matter what. And upon realizing that Brett made his own comeback in less than a minute, Owen gets all flustered about it. He's flabbergasted that his plan did not go accordingly. And, well, they teased a confrontation, but before anything could occur physically, they cut away. Naturally, just in time for a WrestleMania card preview from Todd Pettingill, which did not leave me with happy thoughts. I wrote down virtually nothing about anything that happened here, but I did take the opportunity to note that in addition to the matches we already knew about, here were some of the add-ons. One of them being the WWF Tag Title match between the Quebecers and Men on a Mission, which sounds hideous. A women's championship match where Alundra Blaze is defending against an opponent to be announced. A mixed tag match with Bam Bam Bigelow and Luna Vachon versus Dink and Doink, which sounds equally as appalling. Ludwig Borga versus Earthquake, which I don't believe ever happened because I think they already dropped the Borga gimmick by this point. And when you factor in these matches are considered the underneath programs for the WrestleMania card at this point, the only thing I could conclude with was, thank God Almighty they still had some star power around this point. Because I can only imagine how bad this show would have been if they did not have guys like Owen or Brett or Razor or Yokozuna to save the day. Fuck it, I'll even throw Shawn into the mix. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut a time or two. But my God, look at that undercard. Just beyond dreadful. Funny enough, when they announced all those matches and all those graphics came up on screen, I thought to myself, you know, come to think of it, I don't recall a single outcome with any of those matches. I don't even remember most of them, period. The Bam Bam Dink Doink thing sounds familiar, but I don't know. I mean, I remember Bam Bam and Doink were doing matches together at some point, but Christ, I forgot they threw the midget Doink in there too. Good Lord. The cartoon era of wrestling, folks. Gross. And unfortunately, we got to talk about it in due time. Coming up in about a month and a half, so prepare yourselves now. And in the final angle before they ended the show, they had a brief showdown with the Macho Man and Yokozuna ahead of the title match next week, which I believe lasted for all of about 1 minute. But it was sure one of the hotter 60 seconds on the entire show. But when you really analyze the show in a nutshell, you basically had two main segments going on. You had the opening tag title match, which was perfectly inoffensive. You know, did some fine build for the Razor Shawn title match at WrestleMania. And you had the great Brett Dr. Tom match, which factored in the Owen build and the storyline development for next week's WWF title match. So it was kind of a two-segment show, but all in all, probably one of the better Raws we reviewed in a while. It's amazing how sometimes you take out the pointless squash matches and all the marginal characters and focus on the big stars and the real draws. You can wind up booking a rather decent Raw card for a change. No, seriously, I really enjoyed this episode. I had virtually no gripes with anything they did. And really looking forward to seeing that Yoko Savage title match next week, even though it'll probably end up ending in some lame fucked finish with Crush interfering and screwing over Savage. And it's predictable as all get out, but should still be fun. Take advantage of it while we can, because Savage isn't around for much longer in the WWF before he leaves. Keep that in mind, too. All right. So we're going to blister our way through this SmackDown report, because I really want to get to the Elimination Chamber recap in a few minutes, and this review shouldn't take too long for me to cycle through. If you were looking for the hour-long marathon breakdown like we did on last week, where I came out of it broken, battered, and defeated, I got 2 words for you. Fuck off. I already had enough going on this weekend. I wasn't about to sit through 2 hours of a bunch of pointless, nothing-happening segments. Kind of like how most of the show is a nothing-happening episode to begin with. It opened with a girls' tag match. So already we're off to a wonderful start. And I actually don't mean that facetiously, because by them kickstarting with a girls' match, that instantly gave me the green light to hit the fast forward button on my DVR. It was Natalya and Shotzi, who I continually refer to as Shotzi Blackheart, but I'm pretty sure she's just going by Shotzi these days. They wrestled Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler, if you care. I wrote down approximately 2 things about it. Ronda and Shayna won, and is this really what they've got Ronda doing in WWE circa 2023? Remember when she was a big deal for this company a few years ago? And she was an actual attraction that people remotely gave a shit about on television? Feuding with their top names and coming off like a megastar on TV? Now she's a bit player in the mid-card scene of the girls' division. Pfft. Woo! Great investment, guys. Glad she came back for another run. Now, I did want to throw this in because all throughout the show, they were airing snippets of the Bloodline story, trying to trace back all the chapters along the way that led from Sammy's initial admission into the Bloodline and how everything unfolded and basically boiled over to where we are now. And they spliced these in throughout the show, all extremely well done. Production was on point, the way everything was pieced together from beginning to end. And again, we'll talk about more of this with the fallout for the Chamber show, but everything they had been doing is so great with this Bloodline story. People have been praising this thing and talking about how it's one of the most well-told stories in wrestling in the modern era. And for comparison purposes, I'd probably have to do some deep rabbit hole searching in the archives to find out if there's anything even remotely compatible. But I'm certainly not going to disagree with the idea that the Bloodline story is one of the best told stories in the last decade. Even someone like me that's highly critical of the product today, I'm not going to badmouth anything about the way they've conducted this story. It's too perfectly done. It is certainly better than anything they can conceivably do with Hit Row at this point. Let me tell you. You talk about the epitome of wasted investment. I almost feel guilty saying Ronda's been a total waste of money. Comparing it to these 3 collective wastes of human plasma, good fucking Lord. And again, I ranted about this a little bit on last week's show. I get the gimmick with these guys is that we're supposed to all be in on the gag that they're all completely worthless as human beings. But it doesn't make their segments any less intolerable. And, I can also throw Bray Wyatt into the conversation, and the feeling is mutual. He and Uncle Howdy showed up here and laid out the Hit Row geeks, minus BFAP. Guess Fox hasn't quite approved the male-on-female violence deal. Apparently, Bray wanted to face the winner of the Bobby Lashley-Brock Lesnar match at the Elimination Chamber. Why? I don't know. Guess he's just trying to scout someone else's career to destroy entirely. But, no. Not to delve too deep into spoilers, but we'll talk about what happened in that match and where I think it's all going heading into WrestleMania. Then we had one of our featured matches for the show. Sheamus and Drew McIntyre took on the Viking Raiders, which was fine. Hanson and Rowe, Eric and Frodo, whatever their names are now. You know, they've been around for a while now with Von Holla, who I think used to be Sarah Logan once upon a time. Since they've come back, they've kind of just been floating around aimlessly. They're decent workers. I don't really have anything against them personally. I would argue they had a bigger impact when they were in NXT a few years ago. Yeah, I know Vince kind of butchered their booking when they got called up, hence the name change from War Machine to the Viking Raiders. But even so, you know, under the Triple H regime, he brought them back and they still don't seem to be really clicking. They're just kind of guys that exist on the show right now, which is rather unfortunate because, I mean, Christ, look at them. They damn sure look like beasts. They can do some stuff in the ring too. I mean, I'd argue if it ain't going to be Sammy and Owens that end up dethroning the Usos for the titles, I could make a valid argument that if they push them strong enough and featured them like big deals, I could see the Viking Raiders being two believable guys that could win the straps from the Usos. But, you know, this isn't really a good time for fantasy booking. You know, as a big man match, everything they did looked fine. I like Sheamus's rolling fireman's carry spot from the middle rope with whoever Hanson is going by now. The one with the long hair. I still can't remember his name. But, they also had the cool-looking visual coming back from break where McIntyre and Sheamus were giving them clubbing blows to the chest on the ring apron. And they had the camera zoomed all the way out for that spot. Looked pretty sweet. You know, it's funny how the clubbing blows to the chest still get some of the biggest pops in terms of spots in WWE. Meanwhile, you see guys on the other channel doing corkscrew planchas and 630 inverted splashes, and the fans give them golf claps. Funny how that works. I did laugh at the ridiculous spot before the finish where Von Holla tries to distract Drew so the heels could cut him off, and they're going to set up Drew for the spot where the Raiders could give them the middle rope front power slam. And if you catch it in the right frame, you could see Drew actually reach his arm out to help the Raider get a firm grip on him so he could slam him properly. He's like, "Here, let me help you out a bit there, bud. No problem." Anyway, the Viking Raiders tried for their double team spot at the end, but Sheamus caught one of them with a bro kick, and then Drew immediately followed up and hit the other one with the Claymore for the 3. So, yeah. Maybe I lied about the Viking Raiders beating the Usos for the tag straps. That might not be a good idea after all. I mean, like I said, didn't really have any complaints about the match. I'm not opposed to the idea of Sheamus and McIntyre as a full-time team. It is kind of sad when you factor in how well they were doing as single stars at one point. Yeah, pairing them together as a team just kind of gives off the "we don't know what to do with you guys" creatively vibes, which I know is kind of the thing WWE does all the time. It's just makeshift team after makeshift team. But, you know, on the other hand, when you factor in the state of WWE's current tag division, what other alternatives do you have at the moment? I mean, if not Sammy and Owens, someone's got to eventually beat the Usos for the tag straps. But, I guess we'll see what they do. So after this, who should randomly show up here on SmackDown but a Raw talent? Because, you know, contracts are exclusive to brands. Because they did the brand split, you see. So it would obviously make sense that Raw talents would show up on SmackDown and vice versa. But that's beside the point. It's Asuka. Cool. I know you might all be taken aback by this comment, but if there was a female talent on WWE programming that I would actually consider watching, Asuka's not a bad option. I've always liked Asuka. She was a lot of fun to watch in NXT once upon a time. That was until they called her up to the main roster and served her up to Charlotte because fuck WWE and their perpetual infatuation with that overrated botch fest. But I digress. You know, I saw Asuka come out here and I was like, oh, okay, maybe this will be interesting. I haven't seen Asuka work a singles match in quite some time. Maybe it'll be good. And then I saw she was wrestling Liv Morgan. And from there I said, no thanks. I'll pass. My time is very precious on this earth. And even Asuka ain't getting me to sit through another fucking Liv Morgan debacle. Not after last week. And that directly took us to our second featured match for the program. Gunther defending the Intercontinental Championship against Madcap Moss, the winner of last week's four-way main event. And, well, Gunther tried. I mean, we all know the strong work ethic of Gunther. He's usually able to go out there and make the best out of a given situation. Here, I can merely chalk it up to he gave it the old college try. One of the biggest problems they had placating them here was that since they were in Montreal, they were kind of dealing with the smarter audience, even for WWE fans. So, like anytime Moss was in control here, despite being the babyface, the fans pretty stridently shat on him. And like you could also tell they were getting fairly impatient by this point in the program too, because even though the match didn't go an incredible length of time, by the time they actually got down to the last minute of the match, the fans were audibly chanting "Ole" for Sammy, because, I mean, they knew he was advertised for the show and he was the only thing left, so they kind of really wanted to see Sammy by this point, and that was about it. So, it existed. It was harmless enough. No one believed for a second that Madcap Moss was winning this damn strap, so I think the fans recognized that pretty quickly and didn't care much about the match. Gunther retained with the powerbomb. Really nothing much to add. I still don't know why Emma's a side piece with Madcap. I mean, she's hot. I'm certainly not going to complain about seeing Emma on my TV screen, but again, it's one of those quirky story details that I think they all just kind of expect us to gloss over and not really put a whole lot of thought into. But the analyst in me is going to keep asking it anyway because it really doesn't make any sense. But whatever. And then, of course, we had the real main event of the night. The warm hometown reception for Sami Zayn. One night removed, I should say one night ahead of his title match with Roman the following night. It was cool hearing Sami's old NXT theme again. It's like the ultimate babyface of all babyface theme songs because everyone cheers for it. And admittedly, it is a very catchy tune. Even the professional musician in me can't help but bop my head to it. And again, yes, they were in Montreal, so naturally Sami's over to these people like fucking Steve Austin, and he's milking that pop for everything it's worth. I believe I counted somewhere in the ballpark of 4.5 minutes before he actually spoke one word. He got in the ring, he had a microphone, and these fans would not let that guy get a word in edgewise. He was like one notch below God in terms of the way these people propped him up on a pedestal. And even so, when he finally spoke, he really didn't have much to say. Pretty much in one simple sentence, The entirety of his promo can be summed up as such. Tomorrow night in Montreal, Roman Reigns is going down. And he slammed the mic on the floor. The people all creamed themselves in hysterics. And my final note reads for the SmackDown report. And keep in mind, this was 24 hours before I actually saw the actual show. Sami Zayn better fucking win that title tomorrow night, or he's going to be the worst babyface in the last 10 years. And obviously I'm being semi-facetious when I say that. But man, that was something else. And I think right there, that would be a great opportunity for us to delve into this Elimination Chamber report, because I got a lot to say about it, and it's going to take a while to cover. Maybe. At least I know the main event will. But before we talk about that, we do have to run down the other matches on the card. And that's not to immediately diminish the other matches per se. But let's be honest, the show was mainly about one thing. The rest of it was just placeholder filler material. Oddly enough, and I talked about this a little when I was doing my Chamber card predictions, but with the exception of the main event with Roman and Sami, the other 4 matches on this card were all Raw matches. Or I should more accurately say, matches that were entirely built up on Raw. And yet, by the end, every single one of those matches combined still felt totally inferior to the main event, which was by and large entirely built up on SmackDown. So to say I was already going into this show moderately blind in terms of how much I already knew about the storylines, that's probably understating it a little bit. I mean, I don't even watch the highlights of Raw in my spare time. I mean, that's how little investment I have with this show in 2023. The video clip that I mentioned with the Cody Heyman promo a couple weeks back, that was the first Raw clip I think I've seen in, God, it's been well over a year. I've just been so jaded with Raw's presentation for so long now. I can't even wield myself to go the extra mile of just watching a 5-minute highlight reel to see what happens from week to week. I mean, as you know from the SmackDown recaps we do, I can barely get through 2 hours of that most weeks. And that show is primarily where all the Bloodline story development goes on. And I could still hardly make it through the damn thing without going crazy. So, man, what do you say about this show? It was very weird. Mainly in the sense that, again, I was basically only watching for the main event, and everything else was just kind of a casual watch for me, I guess. So, I should throw this out as a precursor. You're going to have to excuse me if my reviews of the Raw matches come with a lot of questions. Doesn't mean it made for a bad viewing experience. Far from it, as you'll come to find out very shortly. And you know, I've got to admit, when they announced at the beginning of the show that the girls' Elimination Chamber match was curtain jerking this thing, I said, oh, thank God. Thank God in heaven. Man, I got so much I still need to do. I need to prep my dinner. This is great. You know, I can take the first 15 minutes of the show to make my food, set my TV up, get my computer out and ready to take notes. And by the time I sit down and start eating, you know, I figured we'd at least be 3/4 of the way through this match. I kid. Jeez, calm down. It's not to say I didn't watch it. I watched the whole thing from start to finish. And you're probably thinking to yourself right about now, oh, great. So how bad is Tommy going to shit on this thing? Well, no, I'm just joshing. Actually, this wasn't too bad. It was surprisingly decent, considering the fact that it was a girls' match, And it was also an Elimination Chamber match. I was expecting this to be a train wreck and a half like the War Games match I reviewed last year was, or even the Royal Rumble match with the girls that felt like slow Chinese water torture the entire time. This was at least moderately passable per women's standards. It still doesn't mean I can justify the idea of girls getting their own chamber match from now on, because visually the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, it's already incredible to buy into the concept of these chamber matches in 2023 when the boys can't even do intentional juice. But as soon as you throw the girls into the mix, it makes the whole thing that much more absurd. And you know what? Call it what you want. Say I'm misogynist. Say I'm sexist. I don't really care. I'm just calling a spade a spade. For the kind of wrestling that I grew up watching, back when this was still considered a man's sport and everyone always looked like they were in believable fights, when I'm sitting here in my mid-30s watching 6 semi-attractive women do a bunch of choreographed-looking spots, do you see why I have a hard time buying any of this? Especially when I'm watching chicks like Carmella in there or fucking Liv Morgan, who I think I've seen enough to last a lifetime. I mean, they're both probably 90 pounds soaking wet. Carmella looks like she ought to be managing the local nail salon down the street from where I live. I mean, nothing about her says pro wrestler at all when I watch her work. It all looks so phony and scripted. Liv Morgan, I've already done my rant on her, and here we are in early 2023, and they're still ramming her down my throat. Just like they were doing when she was a SmackDown champion, and she was beating fucking Ronda Rousey clean on pay-per-view. Beyond ridiculous. Here's the other problem I had, and I even called this in my preview, having absolutely no context to how this was being promoted on Raw. But seriously, did anyone not suspect Asuka was winning this damn thing? Aside from Raquel Perez Torres Carrillo Jr., what other chick in this match had any credibility whatsoever? I mean, Natty's been beaten to death for ages now. She doesn't mean a goddamn thing in this company anymore, even in Montreal. Nikki Cross, I've always thought she was overrated. I mean, she's been doing the same gimmick since her NXT run when she was paired with Eric Young, and it sucked back then. Carmella was better off when she was eye candy for Enzo Amore and Big Cass, and Liv Morgan, we all know about that already. I mean, this was a foregone conclusion before the bell even rang. And what sucks is that Asuka entered the match last, which meant that the best worker in the thing had to sit out for half of it. I mean, like I said, it wasn't horrible or anything. Taking into account the talent in there, it was a lot better than what I was expecting it to be. But, I mean, that's like asking me to pick between the lesser of two evils. Would you rather have your foot sawed off or get kicked in the balls? I mean, they both suck, but which one would be easier on the body? Like I mentioned, I'm just glad they opened it so I could spend the first 5 minutes of it making my dinner before I actually sat down and really started paying attention. But with Asuka going over, that means that she's getting the title match with Bianca at WrestleMania, which should be fine. I like Asuka. I like Bianca. It's a fresh match that I don't think we've seen before. Maybe. Have we seen that match before? I know we've seen Bianca and Becky a million times, which was where I thought they were eventually going with all this. Only to come to find out that Becky wasn't even part of this match, period. Nor was Bayley, for that matter. I forgot all about Bayley. Like, I mean, on the one hand, that's good because I don't think we need to see Bianca versus Bayley or Becky again at this point. We've seen it. It's not new. And WWE's already exhausted a lot of their top female stars to begin with. To be fair, Asuka isn't exactly new and fresh in today's market, but she's also been around for a long time. But, aside from Rhea, who we know is going to be facing Charlotte for the SmackDown title, are there really any other plausible options at this point? You all listen to my Royal Rumble recap. Some of you. The Girls' Rumble match didn't exactly leave me with high hopes for the future of WWE's women's division. Not with the star power they featured in that utter debacle. And again, how many times are they going to have to go back to the same well with the Beckys and the Baileys and the Charlottes of the world? Even the Asukas are going to wear out their welcome if they aren't careful. Asuka was at least gone for a little while, so she's at least a little bit fresher than the other aforementioned names. I just don't know, though. After Asuka, who's next in line to challenge her? Problem is, I'm still not even really sure if Asuka's supposed to be a heel or not at this point. Yeah, granted they were in Montreal, so the face-heel dynamic was kind of fucked up to begin with. But I think Bianca was a babyface last I checked. So if Asuka ends up beating Bianca at WrestleMania, which I have to presume is the plan right now, where does that leave Asuka in terms of babyface challengers? Are they just going to do Becky and Asuka again? I mean, hypothetically they could. But again, is that not just going back to the well with the same girls they've been featuring at the top for a long time? Bayley's a heel, so that'd be redundant. Bianca, I think, needs to maybe go away for a while and come back later when we've all gotten a break from her. That basically leaves them with Becky and not a whole lot of wiggle room. So I don't know what they do post-WrestleMania, but I guess we'll see if they bother trying to develop some actual female stars on the Raw side. I'd pull up the roster and maybe do a little more fantasy booking, but I kind of want to move things along because we've spent a long time dwelling on this one match, and I really didn't have a whole lot to say about it after the fact anyway. So then following that, we segued into the Brock Lesnar-Bobby Lashley match. Man, Brian Laster's right. I am never going to be able to unhear Brock's pronunciation of Bobby's name. Bobby! Bobby! Sign the contract. Bobby! I'm going to beat your ass. Someone needs to get that on a t-shirt. It's going to end up becoming its own gimmick. So, well, that was rather underwhelming. Not that the entire Lashley-Lesnar program hasn't already been underwhelming in the first place, but this just kind of validated my point. I'd like to sit here and try to break down the logistics of what happened here, but looking back, there ain't a whole lot to report on. Basically, here's everything that happened in a nutshell. It starts off like every Brock Lesnar match you've seen in the last 10 years. Guys trading big moves back and forth for several minutes. Brock hits about 47 consecutive F5s in a row. Looking back, actually, I don't think Brock ended up breaking out any German throws at all here. Probably because Lashley didn't want to take them, so he told Brock not to do them. And after a few minutes of moderately blasé ring action, Lashley goes to put Lesnar in the Hurt Lock. And then Lesnar just punts Lashley in the balls for the DQ. And the ref calls for the bell. The fans boo vociferously. And then Brock kills both Lashley and the official with a series of F5s. I mean, let me know if I'm missing something, but how long did that all end up going? 5 minutes? I mean, granted, I know Brock's not the kind of guy that craves the 20-minute clinics, but would have expected something a little more compelling than this. I mean, this was more of a Raw angle than it was something they should have put on a premium live special. Again, I already mentioned how the Lesnar-Lashley feud hasn't really done a lot for me. It's kind of been missing the mark from the very beginning. Personally, I failed to see how this did any favors in ramping up excitement to see the eventual blow-off. And I'm going to sidetrack here for a minute, going back to that Bray promo from SmackDown, because we touched on that very briefly. What was the point of that promo if they were just going to do the DQ finish in this match? Because doesn't that imply that this is setting up some kind of last man standing, anything goes, no holds barred type stipulation with Lashley and Lesnar? How would Bray factor into the equation? Not that I really want to see Bray versus Lesnar anyway, but with the way they booked this, I mean, it completely nullified everything about that Bray promo the other night. Unless they have Bray get involved in that match somehow, which, if they do, fuck that noise. So at the end of the day, like, yeah, this all sucked, but I'm kind of gathering that it was designed to suck in order to get us to want to see the actual blow-off in Mania. And again, that'd be fine under normal circumstances, but that also takes into account that this feud has been any good to begin with, which it really hasn't. And granted, I haven't been following the feud too closely on Raw because I don't watch Raw, but I have seen both the matches these guys have had on the live specials. I saw the one that they had at the Royal Rumble last year when Lashley was still the champion, and I saw the one they had in Saudi Arabia. Neither of them were particularly good from what I remember. Maybe the WrestleMania match will be. Hard to tell. I mean, last time Brock was in a no-holds-barred match, it was fucking garbage. Ended up bringing a tractor down and tipping the ring over on its side, which was more memorable than anything that actually happened in the match. And here's the other thing, too. I just thought of this spur of the moment based on the finish here. But kind of like how the Asuka thing confused me as to whether or not I was supposed to cheer or boo her. Am I supposed to boo Brock in this feud? Because Lashley was the one getting healed during this match. Lesnar was super over as a babyface in this thing. And even during the video package, it kind of looked like Lashley was acting more heelish on camera than Lesnar was. He was ducking him, avoiding signing the contract, and Lesnar was the one getting pissed that Lashley kept evading him. But then they book a finish here where Lesnar low-blowed Lashley because he couldn't break a submission hold. So who am I supposed to boo or cheer in this scenario? The alleged heel who had the babyface beaten clean until the babyface took drastic measures to get out of a hold? Or the alleged babyface who had to cheat to break a hold? Is anyone else confused by what the fuck's going on here? Or am I just a blithering idiot? Or both? I don't know. Maybe it'll all tie together at some point. Who knows? Moving on, though. That brings us to the mixed tag match with Edge and Beth Phoenix taking on Finn Balor and Rhea Ripley of the Judgment Day. God, does anyone else get the sense this Judgment Day thing has been going on in perpetuity? We're going on, what, almost a full year of this thing? To this day, I am still yet to figure out who the leader of this group is. Rhea's obviously the standout megastar. I mean, her and Dominic have been the highlight of everything, and Dominic wasn't even one of the factored-in talents when the initial group debuted. I actually had to remind myself that Edge was the one that started this whole thing before they randomly kicked him out of the group for no reason last year. But booking and lodging gaffes aside, this ended up being a damn fine match by the end. Tell you what, man. Watching Rhea and Beth work together makes me wish all the girls in wrestling could work at that level. It'd probably get me to want to see an actual women's match for a change. You know, at least Beth and Rhea look like two physical specimens that I would hesitate to pick a fight with. It's still hilarious to me how bent out of shape all the feminists get when people like me would say, "Man, Rhea hits like a guy," or "Man, Beth works like a guy." Obviously, people are not smart enough to understand what a compliment is, but that's sort of the generation we live in now. I'm serious, though, man. Rhea and Beth were the standouts in this thing. I mean, Edge and Balor were there, but they were mainly the outer crust kind of holding everything together. this was kind of a showcase piece for Rhea and Beth, and watching those two work together in there was a lot of fun. Everything they did looked stiff. It looked like two serious wrestlers trying to have a legit fight. None of it looked choreographed at all. And meanwhile, in all this, you got Dominic Mysterio out on the floor causing havoc and being a total fucking prick the whole time. It's absolutely hilarious how much fucking heat this guy has. I mean, he's more over as a heel than MJF is. Just him standing at ringside being a douche to the crowd is enough to get the people to chant, "Fuck you, Dominic." One of my favorite spots in the whole thing was the part where Edge chased Dom up the ramp to the back, and there's like a minute that goes by where Dom is out of sight, out of mind, and while the match is continuing, the crowd starts showering the arena with boos again. Sure enough, here comes Dom, soaking up the heat from the crowd, being a total jag-off as he casually strolls back down to ringside, wearing that "I'm Your Poppy" t-shirt, which I think was an homage to Eddie, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said, the match was very good. Not perfect, but really, really solid. You know, not everything clicked. There was a near catastrophic fuck-up here during a near fall. They do a spot where Edge and Beth have Finn and Rhea in simultaneous educator submissions, and meanwhile the ref is dealing with Dom on the apron. And he ends up throwing brass knucks into the ring during the distraction so Rhea can use them on Edge. So she throws Balor onto Edge, and Beth is supposed to come in and break up the fall, and her timing was so off here, the ref had to basically halt his count at 2.5 to cover up for it. And Edge had to throw up a last-second shoulder. It was totally obvious she missed her cue, so that did not look good. But, you know, they ended up getting back on the same page, and it didn't kill the flow of the match or anything. The simultaneous powerbomb spots the girls did to the guys was mildly impressive. I mean, Edge isn't a small dude either, so Rhea being able to pick Edge out of the corner and carry him over a few inches before spiking him, that took a decent feat of strength to do. They teased a spot again where Balor had Edge restrained in the ring while Rhea had Beth pinned on the ring steps, and she was going to do the concerto spot like they did at that one pay-per-view last year, but this time Beth was able to move out of the way. It was kind of ridiculous how the ref was just going to stand there and let Rhea kill Beth with his chair instead of, you know, trying to stop her. But I digress. That's modern wrestling for you. Got a big pop when Edge did that dive out to the floor and took out Dominic. People love seeing that. And then a few minutes later, Balor tried to set up Edge for the shotgun dropkick, but Edge hit him with a spear and got the clean pin. People went nuts for the finish. I really dug this match. Weird decision to have Rhea's team lose when she's about to wrestle Charlotte for the SmackDown Women's title at WrestleMania. I don't know if I would have booked that if I were in charge. But, you know, I guess in order for them to do the mixed tag, they kind of had to throw Rhea in there by default. And, you know, it's not like she took the fall, so they gave her an outing. So that kind of begs the question of what they do with Edge and Beth for Mania. And yeah, come to think of it, I don't really know. I'm stumped on that one. They've already kind of exhausted the Judgment Day thing, so I don't think we need to see another iteration of Edge versus some combination of Balor or Priest. You know, Dom, I'm pretty sure, is still being factored in to do a singles match with Rey. They could, hypothetically, make that a tag match if they wanted to do Edge and Rey versus Dominic and either Balor or Priest, but that doesn't seem as likely. So, I don't know what they're going to do. Edge and Rollins kind of seem like the obvious choice, but based on what they did at the Rumble with Logan Paul eliminating Rollins and what ended up happening in the men's chamber match that we're going to talk about in a minute, Edge and Rollins kind of seems like it's off the table now. So, I don't really know what their game plan is. Whether they book Edge in a singles match or they factor Edge and Beth in as a mixed tag again. I'm certainly not going to complain about either choice. Either would be a perfectly fine option, but it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing with them. From there, we transition over to our men's Elimination Chamber match. It's for the United States Championship. Defending champion Austin Theory versus Seth freaking Rollins versus Johnny Gargano versus Bronson Reed versus Damian Priest versus Montez Ford. Whew. Talk about drawing random names out of a hat, right? And again, I have to throw this out there because people obviously will not listen and they'll rake me over the coals for it. Take into account, I do not watch Raw. So maybe these 6 particular guys have been booked well on Raw. I don't know. But seeing these names appear on the graphic for this match, my first thought was, did they just draw random names out of a hat and say, this is our U.S. title Elimination Chamber match? Or have these guys actually been developed well on Raw as singles guys? Maybe they have. Who knows? I mean, I forgot that Austin Theory was even the U.S. champion still. I still had to remind myself that he wasn't the Money in the Bank holder anymore, because they totally screwed the pooch with that one. They've already beaten the guy to a bloody pulp. I mean, he failed to cash in Money in the Bank, and I can't remember. Did he end up fluking his way into winning the U.S. title? So even so, they're still kind of booking the guy like an underneath schlub. And I'll say this. While I'm generally against the idea of blatantly trying to book Austin Theory like a bumbling jackass on most occasion, watching Rollins and Gargano pound on him and then ping-pong him around one side of the chamber pods, that was mildly amusing. I don't like it if Theory is supposed to be seen as a future world champion in this company, but he does make for a rather comical crash test dummy. And I'll say this. Even in looking at the fact that they booked an Elimination Chamber match for the show involving one of their completely worthless mid-card titles that nobody gives a shit about, if I remove any forerunning biases and just look at this match in a vacuum with the talents involved, there was a lot of stuff that happened in this match, and while I would not say that I was a fan of everything they did from start to finish, I'd probably say that by the end, this will probably end up being one of the more memorable chamber matches we end up recalling in the next several years. Look, WWE has a formula when it comes to these gimmick pay-per-views. And I've talked about this before with Money in the Bank, the Royal Rumble, TLC, whatever gimmick theme show you want to throw out there. They're not special anymore. We know that every single year around this time, WWE is going to be hosting the Elimination Chamber show prior to WrestleMania. Whether or not there's a chamber match actually warranted given these storylines or stipulations prior, this is just the reality of where we are in the business now. Every year it's that time. Here's WWE Elimination Chamber 2023, or 2024, or 2025, or 2026, or 2027, or 2028, and so on. So, it's already hard as it is to really have memorable or standout chamber matches anymore when we see them every single year, and we know that they're going to happen around the same point every year. Quite frankly, a lot of them are just going to kind of blend in and not really feel all that special. So, as a match for these guys to go out there and try to put something together that the people would remember, I think they did a relatively good job in doing so. To this day, I still remember the first Elimination Chamber match from 20-something years ago, and it was a really cool concept at the time. It was something different, something we had not seen before, and while it never specifically placated to my particular taste in wrestling, I appreciated the idea that they were willing to try out a new concept for a gimmick match. And it also happened to take place at one of WWE's Big Four pay-per-views for their World Championship. You know, and we got the visual of Shawn holding up the World Championship for the first time since he came back from what I think we all thought was a career-ending back surgery. So, I've always liked the chamber match. I just hate that it's been overdone to death in the previous 20 years. Like, every other gimmick concept has been worn out. But this match kept moving from start to finish. Everybody got showcased in some form or fashion. I thought everybody looked good for the most part. Already kind of touched on the stuff with Theory getting pummeled and thrown around like a rag doll. I think Montez Ford's Spider-Man drop from the top of the chamber is going to be one of those highlight reel spots they replay over and over again when they advertise this show every year on The Cock. And it was impressive looking. I'll give it that. I was not a particular fan of the spot where Gargano gave Rollins the Hurricane Rana off one of the chamber pods onto the pile. That looked a little too dodgy for my liking. It almost looked like Gargano nearly cracked his head on the frame of one of the pods as he came down, too. Like, there was no way for him to protect himself in a spot like that. Completely unnecessary. Really wasn't needed. I mean, it looked visually amazing. People went nuts for it. But, could have done without that spot. I did get pretty nauseous when Montez Ford and Seth Rollins were doing the exchanging blows. Everything was punch, camera cut, punch, camera cut, punch, camera cut, punch, camera cut, punch, camera cut. Ugh. It was about 3 seconds away from vomiting. But, all in all, what can you say, man? It was a spectacle. But again, it was a really good spectacle. This is one of those examples of matches where you go in expecting the car wreck violence, but it worked in this context. In the run and stuff from Logan Paul at the end, totally worked. Got a massive heat reaction from the crowd. Logan was awesome laying out Rollins and then mocking the fans. And granted, you kind of expected something was up when Montez got pinned, and they were really milking the severity of him getting injured when Rollins gave him that curb stomp on the outside grating. They're taking like 3 or 4 minutes to bring in the referees and the medical staff to help him out of the ring, blatantly leaving the chamber door open so that somebody could easily run in and interfere. Sure enough, right on cue, here's Logan Paul entering the chamber while they're trying to help Montez Ford out. He winds up fucking over Rollins at the finish. So again, that program is pretty much etched in stone now. Theory winning was not particularly surprising. I'm still left wondering what the plan is for him at WrestleMania, if there even is one for him at the current moment. Again, you take into account how essential Austin Theory was to last year's card and the whole Vince, Pat McAfee, Steve Austin thing. That was a pretty big moment for him. I'd hate to see 1 year later him just being part of the card. Hopefully he's being factored into something bigger than just an ordinary U.S. title match. But, we'll find out in due time as we draw closer to the Mania card. But yeah, really good match. And it was long, too. I think this one was just shy of about a half hour. But whereas with a lot of matches that run long, this one didn't feel long. They packed a lot of action into this thing. It never dragged at any point. I thought everybody came off like big stars in it. And, aside from my usual complaints about guys doing dangerous, stupid stunts that don't really need to be done, it was a fun chamber match. Probably one of the better ones we'll be talking about in the next several years for comparison's sake. And yet, by the end, as good as it was simply nothing more than an appetizer to prepare ourselves for the main event. At long last, it has come to this, the main event, for the undisputed Universal Heavyweight Championship of the world. Defending champion Roman Reigns squares off with former bloodline brethren and hometown hero Sami Zayn. Gotta give him a nickname. If Seth wants to be Seth freaking Rollins, I think we need to start referring to Sami as Sami motherfucking Zayn. Would that pass the sniff test? People drop F-bombs on television all the time in wrestling now, so why not embrace it? Anyway. Well, we've been patiently anticipating this for seemingly what feels like eons by now. We've waited to see the payoff. We were kind of half-expectingly waiting for it to take place at WrestleMania, but even through what's been a hell of a roller coaster ride with Sami, Roman, and the entire bloodline, there is still an overarching story for WrestleMania that WWE has been waiting to pay off for well over a year now with Cody. And sometimes sacrifices must be made, as we came to find out by the time we got to the finish here. And man, if there was ever a time for Paul Heyman to swerve us all and book this generation's equivalent to the Montreal Screwjob, this would have been the place to do it. And the biggest question was by the end, did they miss their golden opportunity by not bringing in Earl Hebner to guest referee this thing? Man, you wonder. So, well, how does one even go about reviewing this? You all know, if you've been following my SmackDown reviews, how much I've loved this Bloodline stuff. It's been some of the most compelling television WWE's done in a long, long time. And every single time they appear on camera, I don't even want to take notes or try to jot down anything about the segments. I just want to sit there and be immersed by the storytelling. This is a prime example of one of those stories where I actually look forward to the VTRs where they highlight everything in the feud from the beginning, because you get so excited to see how the dots connect over time and how everything develops from chapter to chapter in this program. It's all been slow burn storytelling, and everybody in this thing has been great. Especially Sami, man. Especially Sami, who I might argue is more over now as a babyface than he was when he was in NXT almost 10 years ago, getting nuclear babyface pops at those takeover shows. And again, yes, factor in they were in Montreal, so maybe my perception was a little bit skewed, but I've listened to those crowd reactions Sami's been getting on television in the last several months. That dude is white hot. Arguably hotter than Cody. And while it's easy to say that this match will wind up making my top 10 matches of 2023 easily, probably even my top 2 or 3 by the end of it, man, the first 5 minutes of this thing alone is all you need to know about how, when done correctly, the art of professional wrestling still rings true. It's the perfect argument against all the idiot marks out there that try to insinuate that wrestling is all about the moves, to where I immediately shut them up by sitting them down in front of a TV monitor and playing for them the first 5 minutes of this match, where all Roman and Sami have to do is literally stand in the ring across from one another and soak in the reactions from the crowd. Didn't need to lay one single fucking finger on each other. All they had to do was stand there and absorb the environment. It's a rare case in wrestling where you get these kind of moments, but when they arrive at the doorstep, you do not forget them. I'll remember this moment like I still remember Hulk Hogan and The Rock standing across the ring absorbing the crowd reaction to WrestleMania. I don't remember a goddamn thing about the moves they did in that match, but I remember that stare down. And I remember the night that the fans turned Hulk Hogan babyface and turned The Rock heel when they were supposed to be on the polar opposite end of the spectrum. You don't forget shit like that. Or, another textbook example would be the Hogan-Andre feud. Do you remember the moves they did in that match at WrestleMania 3? Aside from the body slam and the leg drop finish, hell no, you don't remember the fucking moves they did. But you sure remember that stare down. The way they milked that reaction for all it's worth, as did Hogan and The Rock years later. Because that's what wrestling's always been about, man. Those kinds of moments. Those larger-than-life characters and icons that make you believe in them. Roman and Sami stood across the ring from each other here, and they just let the room speak for itself. And God, Roman had so much heat in this match from the onset, man. The moment they finally locked up and Roman put Sami in that side headlock, showered with boos. They booed Roman Reigns for putting Sami Zayn in a fucking headlock. Let me repeat that. A headlock. AEW wishes they could generate that much heat in a wrestling match. And it goes the other way with Sami. The crowd ate up everything he did. They booed everything Roman did. And I'll tell you, man, for the first time in a long time in watching a wrestling match, I could pretend that I was a kid again, watching this product when wrestling got this kind of nuclear response. I loved Roman's bantering with the crowd, loved the idea that he was selling the frustration to the people heckling him and chanting "fuck you, Roman" throughout the whole thing. Of course, in addition to them being in Montreal, that meant that Sami had a lot of his family at ringside watching, up to and including his wife and kids. So, right there, the cynic in me, all the warning bells immediately should start flashing off saying, yeah, Sami ain't winning that fucking strap. Not in front of his wife and kids. That would make him too much of a babyface. And granted, while I wasn't particularly fond of the whole stuff with Roman berating Sami's wife, mostly because her acting was beyond atrocious, the people got on his case for it. So, I can't say it didn't work. And a few minutes later, when Sami got in control again and started pounding away on Roman near the barricade where his wife was, that got a big pop. For a lot of the match, Sami worked as the underdog, babyface in peril, which he's always been good at. Roman slowing the pace down and just being a methodical douchebag heel. That was awesome. When Sami got in all his hope spots, the people stayed with him. The moment where Sami actually caught Roman with the Superman punch and the haluva kick for the first time, everybody shat themselves for that near fall. They even had me for a split second there thinking, oh wow, they might actually do this. But nah, Roman kicked out. And then he tried bailing out to the floor, but Sami stayed in control. And after throwing Roman back into the ring, he tried to set him up for a blue thunder bomb, but they ended up doing their first ref bump in the corner, so the official goes down like a wet sack of potatoes. Sami got another haluva kick on Roman for the visual pin, which, that right there was pretty much the point where everybody figured, all right, the jig is up. It's only a matter of time. So, out comes Jimmy Uso to run interference on behalf of Roman. He lays out Sami and gives him a big superfly splash so Roman can take advantage. And I'm going to pause for a minute and strongly nitpick one thing in this match. There was one thing I hated in this whole match. Otherwise, it was perfectly booked. The spot where Jimmy hit the splash onto Sami, and within a matter of literally seconds, here comes the second official to slide underneath the ropes and count the near fall on Sami. That was ridiculous. Clearly this official would have seen Jimmy interfering on behalf of Roman, so right there, he should have called for the bell. I did not like the timing of that spot at all. Even if they would have waited a few more seconds for Jimmy to just get out of the ring so the second official could run down, all right, that would have worked. But, Jimmy hits the splash on Sami, and then less than 2 seconds later, here's the second referee running in to count the fall before Sami kicked out. It was come on now. That was my one gripe with the whole thing. The timing of that was a little iffy for my liking. But man, I'll tell you, when Sami kicked out of that fall, the people went ballistic. Oh God, poor Roman. He's trying so hard to yell and get in Sami's face here at the end, but his voice is totally shot. All you hear is Roman doing a bunch of high-pitched squealing. It sounded hilariously awful. And while he's admonishing Sammy for everything he's done to Roman's family, he goes to slap him in the face, and Sammy responds with a thunderous slap of his own. People pop for that. Pretty soon, down goes the second official with a duck Superman punch attempt from Roman. At which point, Heyman throws in a chair from under the ring for Roman. And while Roman is trying to set up Sammy to kill him with this chair, who should come out but Jey Uso? And Roman's looking at Jey, who's standing in the line of fire between him and Sammy. Roman's telling him that he's got a decision to make right now. It's the bloodline or it's Sammy. So he holds out the chair for Jey to grab, but Jey's not taking the bait. He's standing there looking at Roman motionless. So Roman gets fed up with all this BS very quickly. He starts paintbrushing Jey, calling him a piece of shit, blah, blah. And they're teasing us with that last remaining cliffhanger in this whole bloodline story, that Jey's finally going to turn on Roman and help Sammy. And they're hanging that bait over us. We're clawing at it. We want to see it. And right before it happens, bam, miscommunication from Sammy. He ends up spearing Jey instead of Roman, at which point everybody in the building audibly and collectively went, fuck. Because they knew what was coming. The inevitable was upon us. Sure enough, Roman cracks the chair over Sammy's back, hits him with a spear a few seconds later. 1, 2, 3. And he could just hear the wind get taken out of the room at that point. It was like everyone knew from the moment Sammy hit Jey with that inadvertent spear, they knew it was over. They knew exactly where it was going. They did that old trope where they have to pan the camera around to show all the shocked, disappointed reactions from the crowd. Because that's a WWE thing, which AEW also blatantly rips off constantly. And the people at this point, they're not even really booing the finish. They're just collectively sitting there disappointed because, even if a lot of them figure that Sammy wasn't winning this title here, the idea of it actually happening, as slim as the possibility ever was, the bottom line is that was enough to get the fans emotionally invested in this thing. And again, it's why that regardless of what you think about the finish, you can't really argue that this will not wind up being one of WWE's better pay-per-view caliber matches they produce all year. Maybe aside from Cody winning the title in a couple months, I don't think anything is going to have this level of emotional attachment. These Montreal fans were white hot for this thing from start to finish, and there aren't too many matches in recent times where you can say had this level of emotional investment. Not in WWE, not in AEW, not in any major wrestling market globally. This was an absolute tremendous piece of business. Hats off to everybody involved in putting this together. As a very cynical, jaded wrestling fan in 2023, not too often is the case that I will find these kinds of wrestling matches that I can mark out for and just review as a general casual wrestling fan. This one hit on all cylinders. And it's the kind of wrestling that I wish we could get more of in today's climate. It's all circumstantial and dependent on the pieces of the puzzle coming together at the right place at the right time. And even so, sometimes the most crucial part of the story can still get fucked up if the finish outcome is not suitable. And this, I think, is where you're going to hear the most backlash from fans. Smart fans and casual fans alike. How could you not put the title on Sammy when the stars were perfectly aligned for them to do it? And look, far be it for me to sit here and try to assuage the marks in this business. But I get it. Older fans like myself have been exposed to a lot of bad shit in wrestling over the years, especially in WWE, man. There's a valid case to be made that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And by them not putting the title on Sami here, they may not get an opportunity like this again. And perhaps that's the case. Nobody's a fortune teller, but who knows? Anything is plausible. Here's what you have to keep in mind, though, especially with the afterbirth angle they shot here. Okay, even if you want to argue, they should have gone with Sami, or they should have gone with the three-way for WrestleMania like they did with Danielson. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a completely absurd opinion, but in the overall scheme of what this could lead to, who's to say that Sami doesn't end up getting his win back over Roman at some point? Because as much as we would all like to see Sami as the Universal Champion, what's the Bloodline story been about from the very beginning? It's been about Sami trying to rebuild himself from the ground up and prove that he's worthy enough to credibly stand across the ring from guys like Roman, the most dominant world champion WWE's had in the last 40 plus years. Did Sami do that? In the context of the story they've culminated on television, yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, would have maybe been nice for Sami to be the one to dethrone Roman for the title, but was it ever really about that? Or was it about Sami being the ultimate crack in the foundation that led to Roman's ultimate and eventual downfall before WrestleMania? I mean, he's already caused dissemination with Jey Uso. Jimmy and Solo are still firmly behind Roman, but what happens if Roman does something to piss those guys off before WrestleMania? What happens when Roman is left to fend for himself in Mania against Cody without the support of his family? Who's going to be there when Roman finally loses it all? The answer is nobody. And it's all thanks to Sami. And on the other hand, with Kevin Owens coming out here at the end and laying out the Bloodline guys, helping Sami out before that final shot where Sami got to hit Roman with the haluva kick in the corner. I mean, you can see those guys being factored into the tag title equation now, right? Jay's still on the fence, but, after getting unintentionally laid out by Sami here, now he might have a beef to settle with Sami. Because now Jay has to prove that Sami spearing him was accidental. So, they're going to have that story lingering over us. And again, Jay really doesn't know where he wants to pledge his allegiance right now. He hasn't picked a side. What better time for him to pick a side than perhaps WrestleMania? Maybe during an alleged tag team title match that has not been booked yet, but could still be. Again, I can see the frustration with fans thinking they missed their window on not putting the title on Sami here. But I still go back to what I've been saying from the beginning with this Bloodline story. Was Sami really the right fit to beat Roman? Take out the Montreal reception, take out your personal biases for a minute. In the overall picture of what's going to mean more and what's going to have the bigger story implication, I think Cody Rhodes still needs to be that guy. The story of him finally reaching the top of the mountain and proving that WWE always had it wrong with him, that he always had what it took to be a main event guy, and that the machine was never going to get behind him under a previous regime. And now it's Cody's chance to rectify all that and be the guy to end Roman's 900-plus day title reign. Soon to be 1,000 by the time we close in on WrestleMania. Again, big picture versus little picture. I think Zayn and Owens beating the Usos for the tag titles at WrestleMania is going to mean just as much as Cody beating Roman. That'll tie up all the loose ends with the Bloodline story. Even if Jay ends up doing something like walking out on Jimmy and giving Sami the nod of approval or whatever, it'll at least be a great culmination to closing out 2 long-standing title reigns and kickstarting something fresh after WrestleMania. It's all just a long-winded way of me saying, I get the anger. I get the disappointment. But removing the passionate, emotional discussion from the argument and trying to be rational about what needs to happen versus what we want to have happen, I think this was the right move. I've reflected on this a lot in the last day or so, and I can't really argue against what they did. I know I wasn't really fond of the idea of them beating Sammy unless they had a major outing for him by the end. And with the way they laid this out, they absolutely did everything to paint the idea in your head that Sammy had this guy's fucking number. They established that Sammy was on an even playing field with Roman for this night. And this was really one of the first times throughout Roman's entire title reign where we all actually bought the idea that his title reign was in serious jeopardy. You bought it. I bought it. The Montreal fans sure bought it. I think that's all we could have asked for. I'll remember this match for a very long time, as will a lot of other fans for that matter. And you know what? It rounded out what would have otherwise been a really good show overall. I was not particularly fond of the booking of the Lesnar-Lashley match, and the Women's Chamber match didn't really do a whole lot for me. You know, at least Lesnar and Lashley was short. And again, the girls' chamber match wasn't hideously bad or anything, just not my cup of tea. But the mixed tag match was really good. The men's chamber match was great. And the main event was excellent. Outstanding. This actually had the vibe of a real old school wrestling show where the card actually progressed and built throughout, as opposed to hitting their mark early on and then following it with a bunch of subpar matches afterwards that nobody gave a crap about. This got me amped up for WrestleMania, seeing how they end up rounding out that card. There's a lot of possibilities they could still run with. Not everything's been facilitated, but they highlighted a couple key programs here, and I can't complain about any of it. I'm a little skeptical about the Lashley-Lesnar thing because, again, I haven't really been digging that feud. I don't really see why they need to go back to the well with it for a fourth time. But, I mean, doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad match. So, yeah. This one's been getting rave reviews from even the most critical WWE fans. I'll throw my name into that hat. Trust me, I've been highly critical of this company for a very, very long time. But much like AEW, when they hit their mark, I make sure to point it out and credit them where it's due. This is a very easy thumbs up show, and as a go-home special before the WrestleMania card, did a nice job facilitating more programs. Much more easier to watch than that Royal Rumble card was in January, which just sucked all kinds of wet cock. Minus Cody winning the men's Rumble match. But, you know, as always, you can feel free to chime in and share your thoughts down below if you watched it. I think that'll round out today's podcast. So be sure to stick around for this upcoming Friday. It'll be sort of back to business as usual there. Not this weekend. I believe it would be the following weekend. That would be AEW's pay-per-view. And just pulling up something real quick here because I'm going to plan on doing a card preview for that show. I just kind of want to see if they had anything announced already. Nope. It's still kind of left off where it was last time. So I'll give it another week or so before I kind of preview what they do. The go-home show should put into perspective what that card's going to look like. So we'll see what they do there. Thanks for watching all. Take care. And peace out.